My name is Evelyn Yates, and I'm a librarian with special services. And I'd like to welcome you to the UAPB John Brown Watson Memorial Library. If you look around, there's a lot of history in this room. I want to call your attention to our first president, who was John Brown Watson. We also have Lawrence Davis Sr. We have Herman Smith, who the room is named after is Lawrence Sykes Howard. Is it Howard Sykes? It's Howard Sykes Auditorium. So in this room there's a lot of history, and I'd like to welcome you here. We're celebrating National Library Week, and it's 2017 theme is Libraries Transform. Not only do they transform people, but they transform children, they transform situations, like the one we're going to talk about today. Miss Donna Daniels is our guest. I want to read you a short poem that I found yesterday. Let me take off my glasses. The name of this poem is Libraries. It's by Julia Donaldson. Everyone is welcome to walk through the doors. It really doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. There are books in boxes, books on shelves. They're free for you to borrow, so help yourself. Come and meet our heroes, old and new, from William the Conqueror to Winnie the Pooh.
No.
You can look in the mirror, or you can read the Times, or bring along a toddler to chat some rhymes. The librarian friend who loves to lend, so see there's a book that she can recommend. Read the book and it will be bitten. You can borrow all the ones the author's written. Are you into battles or biography? Are you keen or is it geography? Gardening or ghosts, shorts or science fiction? There is something for everyone with every addiction. There are students revolving deep in concentration, and student kids doing projects, finding inspiration. Over the counter, there's a table with seating, so come along and join in a book club meeting. Guests come to the library, browse and borrow, and help make sure it'll be still here tomorrow. I think it is very appropriate to celebrate National Library Week. And once again, as they say in the church, you're welcome, you're welcome, and you're welcome. I'd like to introduce Donna Daniels, who is from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville on Mike. Okay, Donna Daniels is the Associate Librarian and Faculty Member at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. She is a government document and social science librarian. I'd like for you all to give Ms. Donna Daniels a family UAPB welcome. And the next voice you'll hear is Ms. Donna Daniels.
Well, I want to thank everyone here at UAPB. I have received such a warm welcome, and it keeps going through my head. How can I make all of you feel so welcome when you come to Fayetteville? Because I don't think I can top it. I really don't. You all have just been fabulous. So I never thought that Alzheimer's would become a research interest for me, but it happened because of my mother. And the title of my presentation, as you can see, is The Long and Winding Road. You know, years ago we referred to cancer as the big C. No one wanted to talk about it. Well, now Alzheimer's is the big A. People don't want to talk about it. They don't know how to respond to other family members, to friends. It's a very lonely journey for many people as a caregiver. And to watch that loved one slowly slip away on that long and winding road is painful. It's very, very painful. So I dedicate my talk to my mother, Love Roussel Short. And while it was not my biological mother, she and her family made me part of their family after my own parents had passed. And I've been a part of their family for over 30 years. She was born in France, raised in Puerto Rico, where she met my dad when he was in the Army, came to the U.S., spoke 5 languages, and something many people don't know about dementia and Alzheimer's is that people who are ESL, English Second Language English speakers, as they progress with the disease, they go back to their first language. So while Spanish is easy, I met a woman who was Russian in one of the facilities. And for her to have caregivers at that facility know how to communicate with her, very, very difficult. So this was Mom when she was 20, and she was a beauty, an absolute beauty. And this was before she went into a facility. You see, she's happy, very conscious of her appearance, had her glasses, her teeth. One of the facilities lost her glasses. We never did get the right glasses back, so Mom went around without wearing any glasses. She lost her wedding ring at a facility, which has been painful for my sister that she does not have that particular piece of jewelry. So, yeah, and this is her a couple years later. Still very concerned about her appearance, and I would do her laundry each and every day. Dad would go up and have lunch with her. My sister or I would have dinner with her, because one of the things you learn as a caregiver, they tell you, be involved, be there. Well, that's a double-edged sword. I'll tell you that because we had many experiences because of that. Mom got to a point where she didn't like someone touching her hair. And so it was difficult to get somebody to do her hair, but she had that spirit through and through. And this is one of my all-time favorite pictures. This is Mom and Miss Vera. Now, I knew one of Miss Vera's daughters back in 1983. She was one of my first work-study students up in Fayetteville. And Angela and I have been friends all through the years. Her sister worked on the U of A campus, and then her brother became my work-study student. And at 18, I can remember calling Chris's room and listening to the message. And he came into work, and I said, "What does your mama think when she hears this message on your voicemail?" And he didn't say much, and I said, "So what do you want to do with your life?" And he says, "I want to be the man." I said, "Well, Chris, there are no 18-year-old men." He says, "I want to be the man." I said, "Chris, there are no 18-year-old men." And I stuck by him until he got suspended from school, and then saw him a couple years later, and he said, "Miss Donna, you don't know how many times I have thought about what you were trying to say to me." He ended up back in school, he's married, he's got a great family, and then fast forward, and his mother ends up being my mom's roommate at the facility. And I used to kid with Angela and Chris that I was one of the Seawood kids. Little did I know we would have this connection. And they would comfort one another constantly. so one thing I learned as a caregiver is to keep a Spanish translation app on my phone, and because Mom was raised Catholic, I kept the rosary on my phone. Now with Miss Vera, after Mom would fall asleep or I'd say goodbye to her, and I'd always say goodbye to Miss Vera, and she would have anxiety and we would talk, and I'd say, and let me preface this, I personally don't know how you can go through this disease without some sort of faith life. And so Miss Vera, knowing that she was a very spiritual woman, I would sit with her and say, I know that God wants you to be easy in your mind, so why don't we just sit here? And I'd read Proverbs or the Psalms to her until she felt calmer, and then I'd leave for the night. And then Angela and I would talk about her mom, and hear all those girls, and many of you will relate to this. Many of those girls had their families and their jobs, and also caring for their mom, and then their dad being over in Forest City, and it was a challenge. And so it takes a village when you have somebody who has Alzheimer's or dementia. Okay, so you hear those terms thrown around all the time, dementia and Alzheimer's. Dementia is the umbrella, and Alzheimer's is the largest percentage of disease under that dementia umbrella, 60 to 80%. And those are the diagnosed cases. There are a lot of people who aren't diagnosed. There's also vascular dementia. My mom actually had vascular dementia, and 2 months ago we found out my 68-year-old brother is in stage 3 of vascular dementia. And he's still at a stage where you think he's perfectly normal, and then the paranoia, anger, jealousy, irrational behavior comes out. I've had to put he and his wife on my phone plan, and I'm with Verizon. I got something called Family Base. Most people use it for their teenagers. I use it so I can see who he's calling, and so I could block all the home shopping networks, because he was spending so much money, and even though we put blocks on the account, it was contributing to some financial difficulties. So Monday I got out of a meeting and I get a message from Family Base that says, Dan called 911. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I called Connie, my sister-in-law, and she explained to me what happened. And then Danny called the police on top of that. And then he got over that phase, and we're kind of at a calm spot again. And I think those of you who are caregivers know exactly what I'm talking about. Lewy body dementia. Most people really learned about that after Robin Williams committed suicide, because he had Lewy body dementia. And they're finding connections now with Parkinson's and Huntington's disease as they do that research. So there are many different diseases that will be impacted as research continues. So Alzheimer's. We have sort of 30 years leaps and bounds. So in 1906, Eloy Alzheimer's was looking at brains of women who had died of mental illness, however that was defined back then, and saw some variations. And then 10 years later, good old Emil, he was doing his research and he's going, hey, this guy had something going on here, and so let's call this Alzheimer's disease. Then in 1931, when the electron microscope was developed, they could look at the brain further and see what was going on. But it wasn't until 1968 that there were any cognitive measurements that could be used in diagnosing Alzheimer's or dementia. Watershed moment, 1974, when the Institute of on Aging was created in the National Institute of Health. And a very important woman who, I'm outing myself here, back in my college days I thought she was phenomenal, Shirley Chisholm from New York. She was involved with getting this started. She was involved with that bill and helping to see it through to become law. 1980, Alzheimer's Association was formed. And in 2010, they finally started doing clinical trial databases. So here are some numbers. 1 in 6 women. You guys sit in meetings, maybe you're at your church or you're at a movie or something, you're just kind of looking around. I tend to look at eyewear. I really like looking at people's eyewear. But when you think of 1 in 6, I'll look around a room and I'll think, so which of my colleagues is it going to be? And I know that's horrible, but I've lived this so much, and when I was head of reference, I had to see a colleague into retirement because he had developed Alzheimer's. Painful. 1 in 9 adults over 65. That's men and women. And again, those are just the ones being diagnosed. And then there's a big jump with African Americans. At age 75 plus, 20% of African Americans have some form of Alzheimer's dementia. But you know what? African Americans aren't number 1 in this area, number 2. And this is not one you want to try harder, to go back to those old ads with Avis and Hertz rent-a-cars. Hispanic Americans have more, like 30%. So it's pretty daunting to think about these statistics. So I wouldn't be a good librarian if I didn't talk about authority, credibility, and bias when you're looking for information. So authority, anything coming out of the National Institute on Aging is going to be authoritative. The research that's being done, it's going to be authoritative, and it's going to be credible. Things out of the Alzheimer's Association are going to be credible and authoritative. But everything has a bias to it. So what is the bias? Nothing is bias-free. Is there a bias because you're looking at something that maybe isn't a .com but a .net or a .org? And if it's really a commercial entity, and so they're hoping that maybe you'll get to the point where you buy their services. So think about those things as you're looking at various resources. So the federal government, as I said, National Institute of Aging, 1974, and great information. One of the things they have that'd be big help to everyone is their fact sheet on Alzheimer's disease. So what are the signs and symptoms? What are the causes, diagnosis? The one thing, they have support for family and caregivers, but they don't talk to you, they don't bring in the nuances about redirecting, about not arguing, about not bringing up, hey mom, remember back when I graduated from high school? Mom's memory isn't there anymore. Not there anymore. And so with my mom, instead, I would put on Spanish music and I'd say, "Baya, mama, baya." And she would be in a wheelchair and I'd dance with her. Or to calm her, everyone knew to give her a basket of towels to fold. Or my sister and I created an Alzheimer's garden at the facility. And instead of building raised beds, you can take livestock feeding I'll call them troughs, put dirt in them, and any Alzheimer's patient can just roll on up and they can plant flowers, they can dig in that dirt, and that tends to take them to memories they remember fondly and they love. So that's a good one. Sorry. My mouse has decided to go wonky on me. So, National Institute of Aging, but other agencies as well, and they're getting more and more involved. Bureau of Justice Assistance, guidelines for law enforcement. Law enforcement's been all over the media for the last few years. We've seen tragic stories of people with various forms of dementia who have been victims of law enforcement actions. And so they're realizing need to do something here. Congressional Research Service, they put out fabulous reports for members of Congress. And their information is authoritative, it's credible, and for the most part, it's bias-free. My most favorite act, the National Alzheimer's Project Act, NAPA, came about in 2011. And because of this act, every state is supposed to put together a state plan of how they're going to respond. So we've had an interesting 80+ days with our new administration. We've seen the budget, and we've seen how many cuts are being proposed in the budget. What does that mean for Alzheimer's? For the researchers, for people who work, the healthcare professionals, and for the caregivers. And with NAPA, we had made great strides. We're going to have to see what is going to happen. The other wonderful thing is this act brings together all those different agencies. We have many veterans coming back with closed brain injuries, with cognitive impairment, which is related to various forms of dementia. The VA, NIH, and the researchers, and again, the Alzheimer's Association is working with them. So, the scientific research, so important. And it's all about, as I have learned, tangles and plaques. How many of you have heard of those terms before? Tangles are the tau protein, and trust me, I am not a scientist. But what I found so interesting was that the Alzheimer's gene that has been identified shares some of those same characteristics as the genes involved with Down syndrome. Didn't know that. And you can see how research has progressed. This past year, 60 Minutes did a report on Medellin, Colombia, where there are like 5,000 or 6,000 people who are related to one another, and they are a massive study right now being done on Alzheimer's, because they're finding they all share the same gene. And because of these people, hoping for a huge breakthrough on the treatment of Alzheimer's. You can probably find that on YouTube, by the way. So, U.S. public and private initiatives. I mentioned the Alzheimer's Association. Caregivers don't know where to go. They're overwhelmed. Their friends don't know where to go. My dad kept quiet about the scratches, the bruises on his arms from Mom. We had to hide knives in the house. Mom wasn't allowed to cook. And it took a long time to get Dad to the point where he knew she had to go into an institution. I think they'd been married for about 60 years when finally put put her in an institution. And this had probably been going on for 10 years prior to that. So it was a long, slow process. And I'll tell you, you have to find some humor when you're going through all this pain. And we'd go over to the house, and Mom would have a sign up on the window that would say, "Help, I'm being held captive," or "Help, I'm being held prisoner." And she would post these on the windows around the house. I was like, okay. Or she would go outside and wouldn't come inside. And Mom had an eye for the men to the very end. We would ask for a male CNA because we knew we could get a male CNA to get her to do something no one else could. So there she would be sitting in the backyard for maybe 45 minutes, and luckily the small town police officers were so kind, so nice, and they would come and they would talk with her. And finally she would say, "Fine, I will go in the house, but because of him, not because of you." And we're going, okay, that's good, Mom, thanks. You know, you just redirect, you pray, and you hope it's going to happen. So the Alzheimer's Association has a fabulous webpage that is filled with so much information. They have a 24-hour, 24/7 hotline you can call for help. They'll tell you what help is available in your own state. They have a fundraiser called The Longest Day that is every June 21st, the longest day of the year. And what I do is I make memory pillows. People give me a piece of clothing from their loved one, because everyone saves something that was very meaningful. I turn it into a pillow for a donation. And then I give it all to the Alzheimer's Association. And that's a way to use my talent of sewing with supporting this organization I feel so strongly about. But something else they do that is so cool. They have, okay, let's see if my mouse is going to be nice again, and it is, the Greenfield Library. They have a public library that is really a special library. They do interlibrary loan. They have databases, and it's all free to every single person in the nation. All you have to do is go to the Alzheimer's Association website, and you can utilize their resources. And they will send you books. They will find articles for you. They will help you. Okay? Alzheimer's Association also have what they call their celebrity, their celebrity sponsors, or their celebrity people. And so Coach Broyles has been one of those, and I know he's very well known in this state. He now has Alzheimer's, and he no longer goes out in public. The Broyles family has their own foundation for Alzheimer's. Anthony Anderson, who I think some of you probably are familiar with, he's been touched by Alzheimer's. Bradley Cooper, Hector Elizondo, Peter Gallagher just spoke at the Advocacy Days in Washington, D.C. Maria Shriver was just given their highest award at that same meeting. Kimberly Williams Paisley, who's originally from Little Rock and was in the Father of the Bride movies, she wrote a memoir about her mother. She was a speaker when I went to the leadership meeting a couple years ago. Terry Moran, who is on ABC News, and it goes on and on and on. So I mentioned the Broyles Foundation. There's also the Pat Summitt Foundation, and Pat Summitt's son is doing a lot when it comes to Alzheimer's and working to raise money and find a cure. So at the state level, what are the state initiatives and needs? Well, we have a chapter here in Arkansas. The director is up in Northwest Arkansas. huge chapter in Little Rock. The Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. I got that right, correct? Okay, because my favorite work study, who I'm still in contact with, was an Alpha. And so I'm always, is it Alpha this or is it Alpha that? Is it Delta this or is it Delta? And I do that with them all, so that's just me. But the Alpha Kappa Alphas, AKAs, this is their event. This is their, this is what they do all over the nation, raising money for Alzheimer's. And the Little Rock chapter has done so much, so very important. I happen to be on the advisory council for the state chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. What do we need? We need better regulatory oversight, continuing education, and we need better licensing oversight. When you are in a facility, you see how little knowledge some of the people who work in the facilities have. And that doesn't do our loved ones any good. For example, putting on movies or putting on television. That's one of the worst things you can do for somebody who has dementia. Music is much better. The television overstimulates, whereas music tends to be much more soothing. And so some of these things are very, very simple. So better training for workers, better oversight of what's going on at the various facilities. And you'll hear a little bit more about some of our horror stories later on. International initiatives. Alzheimer's Dementia International does a whole lot. They come out with a World Alzheimer's Report. So it's not just a US problem, it's worldwide. And something that talking about more outside the US than what I hear inside the US are the dementia villages. And that's something I'm really interested in. I've been hearing about the idea of turning shopping centers that have been abandoned into housing for homeless. Well, same thing can be done to make a dementia village here in the US at many shopping centers. Another thing I found very interesting in Japan, I heard this on NPR, all first responders are now trained to recognize signs of Alzheimer's because they've had so many elderly people wander away from their homes, and because the population is so dense and they don't know how to get home. And by the time they find some of these people, they're returned to be buried by their family. And so it's at such a crisis point, they now train all first responders. And I think all first responders should be trained. Advocacy and activism. The only way we're going to change things is to get out there, to write our congressmen, our senators, our state legislators, the governor, and let them know we think this is important. And I really like the votesmart.org website because I can get addresses. I can see how people have voted on issues that I'm concerned about. And so this happens to be the website I use for that information. Caregivers. Struggling. As I was talking to someone before we started, she was saying, you know, I'm sandwiched. I'm taking care of grandbabies and I'm taking care of elderly parents and I'm trying to work. And most caregivers are women. 15 million Americans provide unpaid care. That means after we go home from work, we're doing another full day's work with our loved ones. We're providing 18.2 billion hours of care at a cost of $230 billion. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. And one thing we need to be aware of with caregivers, there's a lot of cultural differences. As I was saying, Mom went back to Spanish. She found comfort in hearing the rosary, whereas Miss Vera, reading Proverbs and the Psalms to her were good. Playing gospel music for her was good. Various cultures take care of their elderly and respect their elderly in different ways. And we need to respect that. There are respite programs, but not enough. And the one in Fayetteville, they're available on Thursday afternoons. That doesn't do me any good. I need respite on Saturday morning when I need to go to the grocery store, when I need to run errands, when I have all these other things to do. I need somebody who can look after my loved one on Saturday morning. And so when these programs are getting set up, the people doing them really need to think about not what is best for them so they can feel good that they set up such a program, but what is best for the caregiver. And I know the church that is doing this work, and they do have a lot of people there, and the caregivers are grateful, but there's a whole lot more caregivers who can't use that. And then I put down caregiver types, because I spent a lot of time around facilities. And the one type is I call them the check writer. All they care about is writing the check. They don't care really if they even get a report on how their loved one or their relative is doing. As long as the check is written and they can concentrate on their own life, they're going to do it. Then you've got the person who wants to do more, but they have competing priorities in their life. And that is so hard for those people. Absolutely difficult. Plus, they may be living at a distance and they can only get to that facility every 6 weeks. Remember I talked about being involved and knowing what's going on at the facility? They depend on people like me who are there every day, who form a friendship with them to find out what's going on at that facility. And then there are people like me who are there every single day, talking to everyone. And one thing I learned is that you go out of your own reality and go into the reality of the people in the unit. And that is the way you can be most helpful. So I'm not a 60-year-old woman, but I'm now a 4-year-old child playing with another 4-year-old child. Sanjay Gupta did a special on dementia villages. And when I looked at this picture, I thought, well, I see one young person there, but then I realized he did this in Northern Europe. And going back to cultural differences, you don't see anyone other than white Northern Europeans. And I know there are a variety of different people who live in Europe who aren't all white Northern Europeans. And so, again, cultural difference. Are they being cared for in the home according to the way people in their culture have always responded, or what's going on there? So here are some helpful books. And I would say these first 3 are a must for anyone. Learning to Speak Alzheimer's, written by a woman who was caregiver to her husband. 36-hour day, because that's what you're living, is a 36-hour day. The Coach Broyles Playbook. Very easy read, good basic information. The memoir Still Alice, which was made into a movie and was an Academy Award nomination. Maria Shriver, her work with her documentaries on HBO. She has a blog. She's on Facebook. She's written children's books. She's come out with the Shriver Report. Talk about a woman who is walking the path to help find a cure and to get information out there. I have such respect for her. And then a couple scholarly journals, the Alzheimer and Dementia Journal and Scandinavian Journal of Caring Sciences. Social media. I do like the Healthline blog on the best blogs out there for Alzheimer's. But Facebook, I like Alzheimer's Association. There's now a women's group, Alzheimer's group, and it's really for caregivers on Facebook. There's an Alzheimer and Dementia caregivers group, which I kind of float in and out of because that can be so overwhelming reading how overwhelmed people are trying to care for others. And again, you need to look at credibility. You know, sometimes it's just a place where somebody can vent so that they can go back and do the work. And sometimes you have people who may be a social worker, maybe a doctor, may have had lots of experience and are saying, hey, have you checked out this new book? This would be really good. Have you seen this website? This is really good. So those are some social media sites. And I mentioned some of these future needs. Training for all healthcare workers. I don't care if you're a pediatric nurse or if you're a geriatric nurse. Everyone should have to have continuing education hours in the area of dementia and Alzheimer's. Training for all first responders. I know the Alzheimer's Association has started doing programs for first responders in Arkansas. They've been invited to do some with some of the first responders in Northwest Arkansas and are doing some in Central Arkansas. Need to get out and do more of that. Flexible living arrangements. We have a private pay facility that's $8,000 a month. I can't afford to do something like that. Or there's Medicaid, and then it's so complicated to understand all the Medicaid rules and what happens to your parents' home or your relative's home and all those other issues. So it's a lot cheaper if you can keep the person at home and have a caregiver come in, but that's not what's happening because there's not enough people advocating for that. Better caregiver support so we don't feel like we're going to just pull our hair out. Workplace flexibility. I said my mom is my mama choice. So I have nothing that I can do with FMLA in terms of caring for her. And if you look at the statistics, there are more and more people who are caring for people they consider to be relatives or very close friends who they don't have a biological connection with, but they have no protection or help there because they can't get FMLA, and our society has changed, and that needs to change along with it. And then we need money for research. So my sister Kathy went to the NAP meeting and she spoke.
I'm Kathy Short, daughter of Love Short, who died January 1st of this year of Alzheimer's. I flew in from Fayetteville, Arkansas to share my mom's story. My mom lived with Alzheimer's for 15 years. During that time, I was my mother's caregiver and advocate, even as she was placed in a nursing home facility. In addition, I cared for my elderly father. I supported my sister-in-law, who cares for my stroke-disabled brother, and I worked full-time as an educator. I was fortunate in that I did have daily support of my sister-in-law, my father, and Donna Daniels. All of the literature states, as I think David Hyde Pierce said, that family caregivers need to be involved in the care of their parent by being present at the facility, asking questions, and educating themselves and others. My family did this, and this is our story. Chapter 1, Awareness. None of us were prepared for the learning curve that would be required as caregivers to ensure Mom's needs were being met by the healthcare system and facility. Initially, Mom's illness reared its ugly head as paranoia. I was confused when my mom started exhibiting paranoid behaviors. It was only when I had a conversation with my friend, Betsy Burroughs-Arnold, and she said, "You need to have your mom see a specialist," that I became aware of the huge footprint of Alzheimer's. First, I talked with my dad and my family about the best course of treatment. Second, and the most painful up to that point, was placing Mom in a facility for evaluation and medical assessment. The facility was in a deserted, scary hospital undergoing renovation. The saving grace of this surreal experience was meeting the Alzheimer's doctor who made us aware of the behavioral aspects of the disease and how we could respond. To us, he was a godsend. With his evaluation and med changes, Mom was able to come home and stay another 8 months with my family, Meals on Wheels, and home health helping. Mom's anger and confusion got worse, and Dad was the target of most of this. We had heart-wrenching, difficult choices to make. Mom had to be placed in long-term care. Everyone experienced pain, and that pain lingers today. Lesson 1, awareness. Read whatever you can get your hands on. Join online and local support groups. Seek out medical specialists. Chapter 2, education and training. Education, training, and knowledge of Alzheimer's care is inconsistent and almost non-existent across the board. We experience this with the majority of staff at nursing homes, hospitals, government offices, pretty much everywhere. Dental services would show up at the nursing homes to service Alzheimer's patients at 5:30. That's the prime time, and I think you all know, sundowners. Dental services. Alzheimer's patients transported to doctor's appointments would have to wait as long as 2 hours in the waiting room. The proper and humane treatment of Alzheimer's patients has to be a priority. Alzheimer's must be able to live with dignity. This cannot take place without mandatory education and training. Additionally, there needs to be more seminars for loved ones and caregivers to learn what to look for in an Alzheimer's facility. We chose what we thought was the best Alzheimer's facility in our area, but about 6 weeks in, on Mom's 89th birthday, she contracted nursing home pneumonia. Until then, she was able to handle all her personal needs on her own. She left that facility within 3 weeks in an ambulance, lungs full of pneumonia, after a substandard portable x-ray machine used by the nursing home showed her lungs to be clear the previous day. Mom was tough and she survived this, but she never walked again. Facility 2 was new and had a definite wow factor. They were ill-equipped to deal with Alzheimer's patients, but they needed money, and they wanted beds filled. We transferred Mom then to Facility 3, which had an Alzheimer's unit with a unit supervisor who was phenomenal. She engaged the patients, as Harry Johns would say. She took an interest in all of the residents and their loved ones. We created an Alzheimer's garden at our own expense to help them, that the facility administration loved to show off to prospective families, yet they seldom allowed the residents to enjoy. They were too understaffed, or the staff could not locate the key to admit families to the garden. Incarcerated individuals receive more mandatory time outside than Alzheimer's patients do in a facility. Within 8 months, the unit director left, and we began to see inconsistent staffing in the unit and the facility, including 4 different unit supervisors and 3 directors of nursing. This continued for 3 years until the day Mom left for hospice with an undocumented 12-inch gash in her leg. Lesson 2, become a force to be reckoned with. You must educate yourself, advocate, and be willing to do whatever is necessary to ensure your loved one gets the level of care you were told that you could expect as you tour the facility. Demand that the doctor your facility contracts with has direct conversations with you. My mother was in a facility for 3 years. I had 2 conversations with my mother's doctor. Do not expect all nurses and CNAs to be proactive about your loved one's care. They aren't. Chapter 3, support. The Alzheimer's Association takes in a lot of money, and according to Charity Navigator, they have a good rating, and they do a lot of research. What it does not take into account is the individual experiences who contact the association at the state and national levels looking for help. My past experience is that no one from the state level would contact or help me from the national organization. I was ready to volunteer and to do whatever they needed. I wanted to help and learn and be involved. The greatest support we received while traveling on this long, painful, and lonely journey was from friends, Caregivers United, and Alzheimer's Arkansas. Lesson 3, be a good steward of both donations and volunteers. They can both quickly disappear. Chapter 4, my suggestions. Number 1, as Molly said, partnerships work. I'm an elementary school teacher. My school has a partnership with Alzheimer's Arkansas. One of my students came to me and wanted to launch this program. So during the past school year, K-5 students at my school were involved in programs to raise awareness and educate our school community. As a result, the school presented Alzheimer's Arkansas with a $1,200 donation check. I expect this partnership will grow and expand to other schools as community-based education programs. That will be my goal. Number 2, the healthcare facilities and nursing homes are too understaffed for the level of care they must provide, even if they meet the state requirements for staffing ratios. Those are minimums. We must have mandatory annual continuing education, as everyone has said, for all healthcare workers, especially in community hospitals, where oftentimes Alzheimer's patients are left alone in the emergency room. They're sent to the emergency room by themselves, and at one point my mother reached the emergency room before I could, and they don't know how to deal with Alzheimer's patients for the most part. CNAs must have Alzheimer's certification before working on an Alzheimer's award. And our experience with filing complaints with the Office of Long-Term Care wasn't effective. The facility figured out who filed the complaint. They knew when the inspection was going to take place. The entire system is highly regulated, highly ineffective, completely broken. Family members must be able to file complaints without fear of retaliation against their loved ones. Complaints or concerns, maybe. Healthcare workers must be provided with immunity so that their license or job is not at risk when they come forward to report infractions. I would also like to refer you to a story that I just read recently watched on NPR about South Korea. They have the most rapidly aging population in the world, and their approach to dealing with this is rather interesting. It's interesting to watch and see what they're doing. Thank you, and I appreciate this group and all of your work.
And on that note, I want to thank you all for having me today, and I am more than happy to take any questions that you might have.
We want you to know that this is a safe place for you to ask whatever questions you may have. So please, let's ask Ms. Daniels, who is our expert today, any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels, for the information. My question is, what made you decide, or how did you decide to put your mother in a facility?
It got to the point where my dad could not care for her any longer. Her behavior was becoming more erratic. My dad has bad knees, and she was surprisingly light on her feet, and she would take off out the front of the house. She would try and jump out of the car. And so it got to a point, and it was so painful. And again, that same small town police department and fire department, we said, please do not use your sirens when you get to the house. Please just talk with her. Our father is there. Let him go in the ambulance with her to Washington Regional. And they did everything the way we asked them to do it. Dad came to stay with us. It was only going to be for a few months, and he said, this is like a country club. Why do I want to go home? And so, many years later, he's still living with us, and we're loving it. He's 90 now, and we're loving it. It's great. But it was a very, very difficult decision, and one that only when we had no other option. If I won the lottery, I would have had full-time caregiver at the house, and we would have done that. And I think anyone who's gone through this would say the same thing.
Alzheimer's, and my mother was going through so many things. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is that I didn't know they had an advocacy group. If I had known that, we could have helped my mom deal with her mom. Much better. And I was just thinking that, do you think sometimes when people go through this with a family member that they may need counseling also?
Absolutely.
Where could they, what type? I mean, there's so many people out there with different areas in psychology.
Many facilities have a family group. My experience is they haven't been real effective. But more and more, like the Schmeeding Center, I know there's one here in Pine Bluff, we have one in Northwest Arkansas. They're all through UAMS. Excellent. If you can go to a private therapist and talk about it, that's helpful. Sometimes talking to your pastor or someone through church is useful. Anything that works for you, I'm all for it. I think is so important to have somebody to talk to. And if my sister and I didn't have one another, and we're now dealing with this with our brother, and our sister-in-law is so overwhelmed that quite often we're the ones who, have to give her the guidance and help her make the decisions.
I wanted to ask about, what is respite program?
Respite? That's where it's usually people in the earlier stages for like 3 hours in an afternoon usually, or morning. They go to a facility. In Fayetteville, it happens to be a church where they have trained volunteers and a coordinator, and they have activities for that person, so that their loved one can go to a doctor's appointment, can go do grocery shopping, can pay bills, can get their hair done, whatever it is they need to do. And Alzheimer's Association website has a lot of information. You'll notice on there, my sister said that the school's working a lot with Alzheimer's Arkansas. That's no longer the case. They're working with Alzheimer's Association because they got a new director who's very proactive, and they're the ones who have gotten their act together and doing what needs to be done.
Ms. Daniels, we have a social worker teacher here, Ms. Felicia Cooper. And how can she proactively make sure that our students are prepared as social workers to deal with problems like these?
Ooh, Excellent question. Because when I talk to social work students on my campus, I talk about the importance of being prepared, especially if they run up against a family member like me who is very well versed. I would say to make sure they know about having that personal library of those 3 books I mentioned, because that will carry them through a lot. That they know about Alzheimer's Association website, the NIA, that perhaps you ask the Alzheimer's Association office in Little Rock to come to your classroom and do a workshop. I bet they would be more than happy to come down and do something. And I can give you some names of people there.
One question, you talked about cultural differences. And you know, when you experience that, and I'm from an African American perspective, how do a person deal with like the hospital doctors and things, and their only solution is nursing home, and us as African Americans most of the time we see what nursing homes do, so we don't want to put our loved ones in those positions. So how do a person, a caregiver, deal with those people on that level?
Again, excellent question. And, you know, Daddy didn't have the energy and was of a generation that you just didn't question doctors a whole lot. And my sister and I found our inner strength, I'll say. But I think you know where I'm going. we found our inner strength to, no, you're not going to tell me. You don't know my mother better than I know my mother. You are not going to tell me that. And I had an experience where Mom was being transferred from one floor of the hospital to the other. And she had a moment of clarity where she said, you know, those people didn't want me on that floor. And I about died when I heard that. My sister had experienced it with Mom. She told me that. I went up that evening. I went down to that floor and I listened to this nurse being all sweet, getting somebody settled into the room Mom had been in. And I said to her, you are taking care of my mom. Oh, yes. And she was being so sweet. I said, no, the way you treated my mother should not have happened. And I did not speak in a little soft voice. I spoke loud and proud. I was my mom's advocate, and that's what you got to do. Speak loud and proud. Be your loved one's advocate. And say to them, what you did was inappropriate. If you would not have treated your own mother or father that way, I don't want you treating my mother or father that way. And then I asked to speak to a supervisor. And I said to the supervisor, I know your nurses are required to have CE hours every year. I don't care that this is a cardiac care floor. They need to have CEs done in the area of dementia. And you need to make sure that's happening. I don't care who hates me when I'm dealing with taking care of my loved one. And just do it. Don't worry about it. You may see them at church. You may see them in the grocery store. Just say hello. That doctor my sister talked about, he bought the house across the street from us for his children to live in, going to the University of Arkansas. And my sister said, oh yeah, your father was my mom's nursing home nurse. I had all of 2 conversations with him in the 3 years he cared for her. Well, let's just say those kids were on their best behavior the whole time. Yeah. So just speak up, be that advocate.
Good afternoon. How do you deal with siblings
I knew you were going to get to that.
that's pulling in 12 different directions, and I'm the 13th direction? How do you deal with siblings when it comes to a parent with Alzheimer's and dementia?
That's really difficult, especially if you come from a large family. You gotta find love, but you gotta stand firm. And sometimes it takes saying, I think we need to all go talk with this Jerry psychologist or some other specialist. We need to talk to somebody at the Schmeeding Center and see if they can help us, because it can tear families apart and make it difficult for many years to bring those relationships back together. If you can get the majority to agree that Evelyn will take care of all the medical stuff, and Tracy's going to take care of all the legal stuff, and I'm going to take care of the emotional support for Dad. Yeah, because it does take a village, but it's going to be lots of very difficult conversations. And make sure you have somebody there who's a neutral party who can listen and help everybody come together. Maybe our social work professor has some ideas too. Am I kind of on the right track with what I'm saying?
First of all, I want to say you did an awesome job.
Thank you so much.
I mean, from start to finish.
Thank you so much.
The advocacy part, right on. When you say about the doctors and the advocacy is very important, and even with the siblings. I mean, I think you answered it very well. Yes, it definitely takes people to come together. Like you say, delegating who's going to do what. Because I could just know of a situation where when my grandmother, she had breast cancer, and it was my mom and a sister, and it was 8 of them, and it became very difficult. So you have to know that it's going to take more than just one person to take care of the loved one that's sick.
And you brought up something really good, talking about that there are 8 of them, but only 2 were involved. Say to that brother, I know you're the breadwinner, you've got all this other stuff going, but you know what would really help my sister and I is if once a week maybe you could make a meal for us. Or maybe you could have Sunday dinner over at the house. Or could you just take one day a month where you go see Mom so that I can have that time to myself.
And I'm now going to turn it over to Ms. Yates for awards. You did an awesome job bringing her here.
Thank you. I'd like to ditto on your awesome job. It was wonderful.
It reads Certificate of Appreciation. It's awarded to Donna Daniels in recognition of outstanding contributions to the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, John Brown Watson Memorial Library, 2017 National Library Week celebration. Mr. Fontenette, would you do the honors, please?
Awesome, Miss Ward.
Thank you so much.
I'd also like to welcome the ladies that came from the public library, and of course Felicia Cooper, who's social work, and Glenda Kendi for joining us here at the library for National Library Week. And with that, we're closing. Thank you very much.